Welcome to the Crisis Confidant podcast. I'm your host, Coach T, certified life coach. And this is the podcast where we talk about the challenges and issues of life. And today we're going to talk about a very serious subject, and that is toxic relationships. Now, a toxic relationship can be defined as one that is harmful to an individual's well being, whether it be emotional, mental, physical, financial, or all of the above. And it is a relationship that's based on disrespect, dishonesty, control, and abuse, rather than trust, respect, support, and love. Toxic relationships can have negative effects on an individual's health, on their self esteem, on their state of mind, their mindset, their happiness, and even their safety. And unfortunately, many people find themselves in a toxic relationship and don't know how to recognize them, nor do they know how to leave the situation. That's why in this episode, I'm going to share with you some signs of toxic relationship and some tips on how to get out of one. And I hope that by listening to this podcast, you'll be able to identify whether you yourself or someone you know is in a toxic relationship and find the courage and the resources to get out of it. Toxic relationships are not all the same. There are different types of toxic relationships. The one I'm going to focus on today primarily is the romantic toxic relationship or the intimate toxic relationship. You can have a toxic relationship with a family member. You can have a toxic relationship with a colleague, with a coworker, with an associate. But here we're talking about those intimate relationships where an individual and his or her partner find themselves where they're swinging on this pendulum of euphoria and then the great distress of the conflict that occurs. So these up and down cycles, these vicious cycles, which ultimately result in the death of someone. That's where all toxic relationships end. Some toxic relationships are very subtle. For example, if a person is in a toxic relationship that has reached that point of physical abuse, it's very easy to identify, to recognize those signs, those symptoms, those patterns of abuse because there's some display of it on their physical person. But when an individual is being manipulated, being controlled, it's very difficult to identify that because that is more subtle. And unless an individual has been trained to deal with this or has discernment or has experienced it themselves, it's very difficult to pick up on the patterns. Now, again, there are different types of toxic relationships, as I stated. So we're going to talk today about the romantic, the intimate relationship. And the signs of a toxic relationship begin with recognizing that, again, they're not all obvious and clear. Sometimes they are subtle, sometimes they're gradual, sometimes they are mixed in with moments of positive uh, gestures, if you will. And this is all designed to make the individual doubt that they're themselves, first of all, or to doubt that they're even in a toxic relationship. An example of this would be the individual who is abusive, and then after the act of abuse, they turn around and they provide a gift to this individual, or they gift them in some kind of way as an act of their apology. And there's always the verbiage of, I didn't mean for this to happen. This occurs both with physical and verbal abuse. But there are some common signs that indicate that a relationship is toxic and unhappy. First and foremost, if you feel unhappy, consistently and persistently unhappy, if you feel unsupported, if you feel drained, or if you're constantly being blamed, this is an unhealthy relationship. And these are all signs of a toxic relationship. A relationship should make you feel good. It should make you feel supported. You should feel energized. You should feel appreciated. Uh, it should not have the opposite effect of that. And if you find yourself in a position where you're constantly unhappy, where you're constantly being blamed, where every time you engage your partner, the energy is just drained from you, these are all warning signs. Another sign is that you lose a sense of yourself. In a healthy relationship, you should always be able to maintain a sense of personal identity, a sense of uniqueness that's all you. But in a toxic relationship, what happens is over time, an individual will begin to lose themselves. And what I mean by losing yourself is you begin to trade off your interests, trade off your values, trade off your morals, trade off your worldviews, all in an effort to appease the other individual while they themselves are not reciprocating this type of action. So they are not changing, but they expect you to change. And another thing they do is they isolate the individual from family and friends. This gives them the ability to create a codependency. This gives them the ability to maintain control. This gives them ability to continue to shape and mold the opinions and interests of the individual in this toxic relationship. Now, what is interesting is that while these things are occurring, there's also the up and down stage of the relationship. And this is what makes it toxic. When you know deep in your heart that this individual is not good for you, but for some reason you continue to feel as though they're going to change. All change is demonstrated in both words and actions. So if this individual is consistently, persistently the same, if you're continually going through the same cycle of events, then these are warning signs that you are in a toxic relationship. The ultimate goal is to make you doubt your own personal worth, your abilities, to strip you of your confidence, and to bring you to that place where, again, you're under total control. If you feel like you have to walk on eggshells around your partner, this is a symptom and a sign that, again, you're in a toxic relationship. You should feel comfortable. You should feel safe around your partner. You shouldn't have to feel like everything is going to trigger them, bring out a hostility, bring out a rage, bring out a criticism, bring out a mockery, bring out some form of verbal abuse, some form of physical abuse. So when you're at that point where everything has you on edge, then this again is a warning sign. And when your partner is triggered by the smallest of things, when you're constantly being criticized, you're constantly being mocked and threatened or even physically hurt. Again, these are warning signs, and you need to immediately get out of this relationship. These are just some of the signs of toxic relationships. There are many more that we could talk about, but for the sake of time, I'm going to just stick with some of these. Now, according to Healthline, one sign of a toxic relationship is a lack of support, which means that a partner does not celebrate the achievements or help you with your goals or your challenges. So, again, in a healthy relationship, when you accomplish something, your partner should celebrate that success with you. They should be happy for you because you're not just elevating yourself, you're elevating that relationship. You're taking that relationship to a new level, just as your partner should be doing. And there should be a celebratory pause there, a time out to acknowledge and to celebrate you and to celebrate the success of the relationship. But when you have the opposite of this, again, this takes its toll on you mentally. Another study by UCLA found that people who felt unsupported by their partners had higher levels of stress. That's expected. A study by Harvard found that people who felt unsupported by their partners had lower levels of happiness and were less satisfied with their life. So this has a profound effect on people. A study at Stanford found that people who felt not supported by their partners had lower levels of creativity and productivity. And again, this is because all of your confidence is being drained out from you. So it is important. It is important to recognize, but also acknowledge when you see these things. Another sign of a toxic relationship, and the ultimate, the epitome of it, is abuse. And that abuse can be verbal, emotional, sexual, mental, financial, but nonetheless, any form of abuse. Abuse is abnormal use. Think of it in that context. Any form of abuse can have devastating effects on you. And when a toxic relationship reaches this point, when it comes to the point of abuse, this is the danger zone because that physical violence, that verbal violence, first of all, escalates into physical violence. And that physical violence ultimately results in death. We see it every day in this nation. We see it every day around the world. We see the suicide, homicidal acts of these individuals. And the challenge of coming out of these toxic relationships, there are challenges because you have an emotional, psychological, physical, intimate, spiritual bond with this individual. And this is what makes it difficult to come out. It's almost like a drug. It actually it is. You know, toxic relationships are like an addiction. It's something that you know is unhealthy for you. On the upswing, when on the uptick, when everything's going good, you feel good about the individual. You feel good about the relationship. But when things are going bad, and even when you have those temporal moments where you break up, you disengage, then you go through the withdrawal. And because you're not recognizing what it is you're dealing with, it makes it very difficult for you to stay out of that situation. But here are some of the reasons that people struggle with coming out of toxic relationships. Number one, they fear being alone. People feel like no one else is going to want me. No one else is going to put up with me. And this is because the individual who is the controller in this toxic relationship brings you to that point of devaluing yourself. So you see no more personal worth within yourself. Another thing is love bombing. So this is where all the gifts and the charm comes in. The abuser will shower you with gifts. They'll give you all the love, all the attention. They'll change temporarily. They'll say, "Okay, I'm going to change," and they'll give you a good show. They'll go on script, but eventually things default, and you're right back where you started. Gaslighting. Again, I talked in one of my episodes about what I call the extreme form of gaslighting, which is the pull away. And that's where the individual withdraws themselves and make you feel guilty, make you feel as if you've done something wrong. But their whole goal is to create that sense and to get you to that point where you're so set in your codependency upon them that you can't see yourself without them. The financial abuse, when this individual is constantly hitting you up for money, constantly hitting you up for gifts, constantly hitting you up for things. You know, in a relationship, you have to define, and especially just in a marriage, you have to define how you're going to exercise and how you're going to utilize your finances. But that financial abuse is where that individual knows they have control over you. They manipulate you, they con you into allowing them to control all of your finances. And then the threat to violence. And every threat of violence should be taken serious because that ultimate threat of violence becomes reality. Verbal abuse leads to physical abuse. And consequently, with the lower self esteem, again, you find it very difficult when you're in that place. You find it very, very difficult to see yourself as having any value, see yourself as having any worth. And so, because of that, you default to the belief that no one else is going to want me. But ironically, the one who is abusing me does. Now, ultimately, I want you to look at these statistics. I want you to think about this because ultimately, all toxic relationships eventually end in the death of someone. If you don't get out, and the only way to get out is like getting off of a drug, you have to go cold turkey. You have to run as though your life depended on it because it really, truly does. And you have to cut off all ties to this individual. You have to detox from this person. You have to detox. There's a process that you have to go through. There's a method that you have to go through in order to get this person out of your system, out of your mind, out of your consciousness, out of your spirit, and to break your dependency upon them. And this is, you are capable of doing this. This can be done. This can be done. I've coached people into doing this, so I know it can be done. But you have to think about your life when you're talking about a toxic relationship. And what is it about the violence? What is it about the up and down? What is it about the arguing? What is it about the fighting that's such a turn on that you're willing to put your life on the line just to have someone, just to say that you have someone? You have someone, you really don't have someone, you have something, and what you have is a toxic relationship. But what you could have is a quality relationship. And if you have never been taught how to engage in a relationship, how to have a wholesome relationship, sometimes people are products of their environment and sometimes they're product of their choices. And what I mean by this is that if you grew up in an environment of abuse where you saw your parents, one parent abusing the other, or both, and that became your standard, that became your norm, then you may expect that. But you still have the freedom of choice. You have the freedom to choose to go the opposite direction of that. You don't have to be like your parents. You don't have to be like the standard you saw, especially when you know the consequences of it. You can have a good, healthy relationship with someone who loves you, someone who will support you, someone who will be a good provider, a good partner, who will bring out the best in you, who will see the best in you, who will actually elevate you to a level where they see things in you that you don't see. Because this is how relationships work, at least healthy ones. It is so important to remember that you are not alone. You deserve to be free from a toxic relationship. You deserve to be free from domestic violence. You deserve to have a life of happiness. That's God's gift to you. Life is God's gift to you. Life is God's gift to you. And when you practice a thing for so long, it becomes a norm. And you need to get to the place where you're willing to let that go in order to be free and to embrace your new norm and to have the healthy relationship that I know you can have. There's someone out there waiting for you, someone out there God created for you so that you don't have to settle or continually put your life at risk. And, getting out of these toxic relationships, it is possible. It is possible. And if you're ready to make that choice, you're ready to make that move, I want you to contact me because help and support is available. You can contact me at my website, schemata4u.com. I will give you a free consultation and I will tell you exactly how I can help you. I hope you found this episode helpful. And if you did, please remember to like, subscribe, and share it. If you have particular topics that you would like for me to discuss on the podcast, visit my website or leave a comment below. Thanks for listening, and please be safe.